This is Christian Breton of Quebec City, Quebec. You're listening to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
Welcome, everyone, to the International Radio Report for Sunday, May the 1st. My name's Sheldon. I am here with Jill, and we thank you for joining us on our weekly 30 minutes of news and information on the world of radio. We love to hear from our listeners. You can reach us by email, radioreport@yahoo.com. We're live streaming and archived at the CKUT website, ckut.ca, here in Montreal. We have a Facebook group with 764 members. It is called International Radio Report. We welcome George and Bradley to the group this week. And our YouTube channel, where you can go and listen to current show or previous shows if you like, is International Radio Report on YouTube. And we have 619 subscribers there. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. Also with the Facebook group, you can join and read about all the stories that we talk about on the show and other stories that don't make it to the live broadcast. So lots of information there. And we do welcome your input as well. So always good to get stories from our listeners. We have a bit of a theme going on today's show. Certainly the conflict in Ukraine is providing us with a lot of radio-related information. We're going to start today's show with a couple of audio clips. First off, we have from All Things Considered on U.S. public radio. The headline is, "How does Ukraine keep intercepting Russian military communications?" From April the 26th. And we should warn you, there's some pretty interesting and surprising communications that have been intercepted that you'll hear in this clip. So we'll invite you to take and to listen to this. It's going to be about 4 minutes long.
Russia has a reputation as one of the most advanced countries in the world when it comes to spying, and that includes secretive high-tech military communications. That notion has been shattered by how Russia has handled its communications in Ukraine. For the details, we're joined by NPR national security correspondent Greg Myrie. Hey, Greg.
Hi, Rob.
Ukraine keeps releasing what it says are intercepted Russian communications from the battlefield. Could you give us just one example?
Yeah, sure. Ukraine's military put out some audio on social media a few days ago, and it said this was a Russian military official calling for Ukrainian prisoners to be killed. Let's take a listen.
Let them go forever so that no one will ever see them again, including relatives.
Now, we can't confirm the authenticity, and we don't know that anybody acted on this, but Ukraine keeps releasing these communications, and collectively they do point to something that is very definitely happening, and that is Ukraine is intercepting Russian communications, releasing tapes that suggest Russian wrongdoing, while keeping secret other information that they collect that might point to Russia's battlefield plans.
That's interesting. So how are the Ukrainians intercepting these calls?
Well, several ways it seems, but let's look at the most basic. The Russians brought cell phones into Ukraine when they invaded. Now, when the Ukrainians figured this out, they cut off the Russian cell numbers from the Ukrainian network. So the Russian phone stopped working. But then the Russians seized cell phones from Ukrainian civilians, and the Ukrainian government asked civilians to report their stolen phones, and they did. So Ukraine then knew which phones to tap into, and they've apparently been doing this quite effectively. I spoke about this with cyber expert Dmitry Alperovich.
The intercepted phone calls are just invaluable in getting a sense into what the Russians are thinking, the state of their morale. There was an intercepted phone call where the Russian officer was saying how half of his troops have frostbite on their feet, how they don't have any stoves, hot stoves for food. They're sleeping in trenches.
Wow, that's really interesting. They're sleeping in trenches. They got frostbite on their feet. You know, Ukraine's forces have been listening in on the Russians since the war started. Why can't the Russians figure out how to stop this?
Yeah, this has really been one of the mysteries because Russia is very good at gathering intelligence. It has modern, secure radio systems for its military. It knows Ukraine very well. But in many ways, it seems it's just been very, very sloppy and unprepared. inexplicably, Russia has used off-the-shelf, unencrypted radio communications that have been widely intercepted. And equally puzzling is why Russia hasn't simply bombed Ukrainian communication networks to rubble. Now, there's speculation that Russia expected a quick takeover and wanted to keep the phone system and the railways and the electric power grid in place so Russia could use it.
Right.
Also, Russia is certainly tapping into Ukrainian communications at some level and wants to keep doing that. But whatever the reasons, Ukraine's phone and internet systems are functioning pretty well, and that's certainly not what was expected before the war.
That's interesting. Are there Ukrainians getting any outside help?
Absolutely. They are getting significant help from the U.S., information that they can use on the battlefield in real time or more or less real time. Now, Dmitry Alperovich talked about one way, which anyone can see by simply looking at flight tracking systems on social media.
If you look at the flight radar right now, you see U.S. Air Force planes that are flying near Ukrainian border, collecting intelligence, and I'm sure that they're collecting radio communications and other forms of intelligence that they pass on to the Ukrainians that is invaluable in their prosecution of this fight.
So is this U.S. help new, or has this happened before?
Well, there's some history here, and it's literally dripping with irony. Now, Russia waged major cyber attacks against Ukraine in 2015. It took down the electricity. Then the next year, 2016, Russia interfered with the U.S. presidential election. Now, these Russian attacks prompted the U.S. and Ukraine to work together to counter Russia in the cyber world. And the National Security Agency chief, Paul Nakasone, doesn't say much publicly, but he did testify to Congress about U.S. cooperation with Ukraine just last month, just a couple weeks after the war started. And Russian leader Vladimir Putin probably doesn't appreciate the irony, but his cyber actions against the U.S. and Ukraine several years ago helped forge this partnership that's now being used very aggressively to undermine Putin's war in Ukraine.
That's NPR's Greg Myrie. Greg, thanks.
My pleasure.
What is definitely interesting in this report is showing that the Russian communication system is actually not that great, being so easy to tap in and listen to, the conversations going on and the different military communications where they know where, the Russian attack could be, because they keep some of that information, secret. They don't talk about everything they hear, but shows us that Russian military communications are not that great, actually.
It's certainly not very professional, and it seems to me like whether they know someone else is listening or not, I don't think they really care. The professionalism of, you would think military communications were going to be, A, pretty secure, and B, pretty professional. I think this is kind of an indication that there are a lot of people who really aren't quite up on what they're supposed to be doing, or knowing that there are people out there who can intercept and monitor and what have you. So, stories like this are really interesting, and you kind of wonder why they're not maybe being as successful as they thought they would be in Ukraine and meeting so much resistance.
The other aspect of it also is when they talk about how the internet is actually still quite functional. You would think that would be the first thing you take down, actually.
Yeah, you'd want to target any way of communicating, whether it's radio, television, online services, what have you. But I don't know. It's just really, really strange. And, the second story we have comes from Deutsche Welle's news in Germany. And the headline there is Ukraine's resistance on the radio waves. Ukraine is fighting with more than weapons. The airwaves are a frontier. Ukrainian computer specialists and radio operators have managed to jam Russian communications or even intercept them, revealing some shocking details of the war's brutality. Similar in tone to the first article, but a little bit different approach and a little bit of different content in this one. So this one's about 2.5 minutes.
This man, known as Viking, is one of Ukraine's most experienced amateur radio operators. He's also a member of Radio Resistance, a group that interferes with the Russian military's radio transmissions. They're fighting in the war of radio waves.
Amateur radio is actually forbidden in wartime, but our intelligence services quickly realized that radio resistance can help in this war.
Viking shows us how. Members of the group search through long and short waves for the conversation channels that Russian soldiers use to communicate. Decoding, intercepting, and jamming them is the goal. Here's an example. A driver of a Russian armoured personnel carrier sends his coordinates. According to Ukraine's security service, this conversation took place between a Russian soldier and his wife. He asks her for permission to rape Ukrainian women. Do you allow me to? He asks. Yes, I allow it, she says, but use protection. We have even identified the two of them. We know their names, their social media profiles. We know everything about them, even the date they moved to Crimea from Russia. Ukrainians like Viking are fighting tooth and nail to defend their country. His comrade, known by his codename Rurik, has risen to cult status. He takes radio jamming a step further, speaking directly to Russian soldiers, often insulting them. This is Varan 5, we're under fire, radios this Russian soldier. Rurik jams the call, stopping reinforcements from coming, and then sends this.
Now you see, Ukrainian intelligence work is serious business. You should love and respect your enemy.
At the end of the battle, the members of Radio Resistance interfere with the signal so that the Ukrainian coat of arms appears on the screen. This is what the war of radio waves looks like.
Once again, showing us that the war is not just on the ground. It's not just with military radio communications war. It's, jamming if you can. It's showing the other side, we know what you're doing and we're here.
Yeah, and I think it ties into the broadcasts also that we're hearing from other countries that are going into Russia, going into Ukraine, simply because they know that, there's so much information and misinformation out there that they're trying to give people as much choices of what to listen to and what to believe, try to give them some balanced reports and maybe some neutral reports. But I think the fact that so many people, just with these two stories, there's so many people out there intercepting and listening and jamming, and like you said, it's more than standard warfare and weaponry. It's communications that's so important. It's so surprising the low grade type of equipment that they're using for communications as well. I mean, we know amateur radio operators that got better equipment than this.
So we have a story about a liberal Russian radio station that loses appeal against being taken off the air. This is by Reuters via Radio World. A Moscow court on Wednesday, April 20th, rejected an appeal by liberal radio station Echo Moskvy, one of the leading current affairs channels in Russia, against the authorities' move to take it off the air over its coverage of Russia's war in Ukraine. Echo Moskvy stopped broadcasting last month after the Prosecutor General's office demanded that access to the station be restricted. It also ordered that its website be blocked for spreading what it called deliberately false information about Russia's military operations. The station, which has rejected the charges, later shut down under pressure from the authorities. The court has rejected Echo's request to have the radio station and website restored. Its longtime editor-in-chief, Alexander Venediktov, wrote on Telegram, "We will appeal." Russia says its actions in Ukraine are not designed to occupy territory, but to destroy Kyiv's military capabilities and neutralize what it regards as dangerous nationalists, a pretext rejected by Ukraine and the West as baseless propaganda to justify the invasion of its neighbor. So, kind of what we were talking about, in last week we were talking about the Sputnik broadcast not being taken off the air in the U.S. and other countries actually taking down broadcasts from, any Russian media. So it is interesting to see how each country kind of doesn't do it in the same way.
Yeah, in this particular case, Russia shutting down some of their own radio stations basically because they don't like what those stations are saying.
So what's happening with our sun? We have a lot of activity once again. The sun is peppered with a lot of sunspot groups all over the place. There are some solar flares. There was one on April the 29th, which was an M-class flare. And that's going to be the story for the next week, that's for sure, with high sunspot number, a solar flux in the 130, 140 range, and possibility of flares here and there. So it's going to be a up and down. We'll have some activity, some good activity. I did some ham radio this week, and I can tell you that when conditions are quiet, they are extremely good. Contacted many stations in Europe on 20 meters, so it's really nice to see that the activity is good. The best way to really know what's happening with propagation is actually to take your radio, turn it on, and listen.
This is Peter Laws in Norman, Oklahoma. AM, FM, shortwave, amateur radio, and more. You'll hear all the latest news from the world of radio each week with Sheldon and Gilles on the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
We have one more story, this coming from Radio Reporter, dealing with Ukraine. The headline is Medium Waves Switched Back On to Support FM Network. And this story, I think, proves that there are obviously some people in Ukraine in the broadcasting field who really understand what's going on and what the impact of the actions are having on communications. To counter possible damage to its FM repeater network, Ukraine has switched back to some radio stations operating on medium wave. They had been switched off in 2018, like so many energy-intensive installations supplanted over the years by the frequency modulation, or FM network, which has the advantage of offering better audio quality. But reactivating them has become strategic because they are installations that can serve large areas of the country and are often located in areas far from those affected by the conflict and could operate undisturbed. Of the 6 reactivated, mainly between 24th and 26th of February, only one of these installations has been damaged. They all broadcast the first Ukrainian program, which is UR1 Pershi Canal. So the stations are 549 kilohertz from Mykolaiv, 100 kilometers east of Odessa. That has 400 kilowatts, reactivated on the 24th of February, on air until March 6th. It had been off since January of 2022. On 657, Chernivtsi, 400 kilometers south of Kyiv, near the border with Romania. That has 25 kilowatts, reactivated on the 26th of February. No longer active since February the 1st, 2018. So this proves that the installations were left intact.
Yep. And
they can be reactivated fairly easily. On 837 in Kharkiv, there's a 150 kilowatt station on air since February 25th, discontinued the next day. It had ended broadcasting on February the 1st, 2018, broadcasting the cultural program of UR3, which is Radio Kultura. 873 kilohertz from Chaziv Yar, 25 kilowatt station. This is in the Donetsk region, in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. That one had been off the air since June of 2017. 1278 kilohertz from Kurisov, near Odessa, 100 kilowatts, reinstated on March the 8th. It had been broadcasting also the cultural program UR3 until February 2018. And finally, 1404 kilohertz from Izmail in the Odessa region, but closer to the border with Romania. That was restored on February the 26th. So if you go online And I guess if you could understand Ukrainian, that certainly would help you, because these are going to be Ukrainian stations. Online SDRs that are maybe, on neighboring countries, Romania, for example. You could go to the medium wave band, the AM stations, and try to tune into these. And like I said, if you're Ukrainian speaking or understand Ukrainian, you could certainly tune in and listen to them. And what it shows too is the power of these stations. They're certainly going to have much farther reach than FM stations would. So it's a wise move to get them back on the air. And I really find it surprising that some of them have been deactivated for so long, yet they're able to get them back on very quickly. So, somebody was thinking ahead somewhere, I think, and left these things and said, let's not tear these things down quite yet, just in case.
So there's the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison that mocks the Labour Party's policy on refunding Radio Australia. This is via radio info via Avram Stern from Montreal. So the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said, "I sent in the Australian Federal Police. The Labour Party wants to send in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation." Commenting on Labour's policy to increase funding for the national broadcaster and its external service, Radio Australia, amidst campaigning about foreign policy. Radio Australia switched off its shortwave transmission to remote parts of northern Australia and across the Pacific in January 2017, and some of those frequencies were subsequently taken over by Chinese broadcaster. Prime Minister Morrison referenced Australia's assistance in the Solomon Island capital Honiara during the period of civil unrest in November last year. They are playing politics with the Pacific, and the only ones who are benefiting from the Labour's attacks on our government is the Chinese government. And it would seem the ABC, Morrison said, of the Labour policy. Labour unveiled a package of wide-ranging reforms aimed at boosting Australia's diplomatic and military relationships in the Pacific. The party says its specific plan is a whole-of-government effort, which will combine defense, strategic, diplomatic, economic power to reassure the region they can rely on Australia. Labour plans to expand Australian broadcasting in both the Pacific and the broader Indo-Pacific, partly by boosting the ABC's international programming budget by more than $30 million over 4 years, and potentially restoring Australian shortwave radio broadcast into the region at a cost of $8 million. Under Labour's Pacific Broadcasting and Publishing Initiative, content will promote Australian identity, values, and interests, while partnerships and training with Pacific journalists will be strengthened. Trying to tell people, well, we need this, we need to have some shortwave outlet, we need to have a voice. And other people in the politics disagreeing with it. And it is sad because once you're off, once you're gone, that voice is not there. And I'm sorry, but Australia, if it wants to be part of all of the Pacific area as a nation that is there to help, well, one of the first things that I think is important to have is a voice.
There's a cost involved now, though, even if they do decide. Now, they're talking about a cost of $8 million. We have a CIDX member, Rob Wagner, down in Australia, who's actually visited a number of the Radio Australia shortwave sites, and he's told us that there are not many of them left now. They did actually tear down a lot of them. I think he told us there's only 1 or 2 of the smaller sites left in the country now. So when they're talking about $8 million, I don't know if they're including in that $8 million reconstructing transmitter sites, or are they just talking about the cost of activating what they have left? Not really sure. Australia is a big country, and they had the transmitter sites scattered in various parts, where they could beam off into different directions. So, with only a couple sites left, I'm not sure just what that $8 million figure they're throwing around is actually covering.
If they do reactivate what's left, definitely the Australian voice won't be as powerful and easy to hear as it was in the past. And, $8 million, I'm not even sure if you could today rebuild just one transmitter site and have transmitters running for 8 million. So
we'll see what happens. It's election time and campaigning, and lots of promises are made and that don't come true in the end anyways. So we'll just have to wait and see what does happen. Although this is getting a lot of press. Avram sent us that story. We've seen and reported on other stories about this in the past as well. So I guess once the election happens, we see who wins and how far on up or down on the priority list is Radio Australia. We'll just have to wait and see.
So we have upcoming ham radio contests.
We're going to keep you busy if you're a ham radio operator and you like contesting next weekend. We have many events that you can participate in. The first one is the Me 33 contest, 2300 Zulu May 4th to 03 Zulu May 5th, sponsored by the NTV Television, the Me Prefecture in Japan, and the Japanese Amateur Radio League. Each amateur band allowed in Japan, which is 160 through 2 meters, except the work bands. It's a CW, SSB, and FM contest. It's really centered on one of the prefectures in the country of Japan.
We have the 1010 International Spring Contest, CW version, from 01 Zulu May 7th to 2359 Zulu May 8th, sponsored by the 1010 International. And the band is 10 meters only, and of course, CW.
We have the SBMS 2.3 gigahertz and up contest and club challenge. This is a 0600 local May 7th to 2359 local May 8th, and this is local in California. It's sponsored by the San Bernardino Microwave Society. So this is really something special. The object for licensed radio amateurs to work as many amateur radio stations in as many different locations as possible in North America on bands from 2.3 gigahertz through 47 gigahertz and beyond. So, wow, this is obviously short range, but using very, very high frequencies. I haven't seen a contest like this before.
I wonder how many amateurs actually are capable of going through those high frequencies. There's the ARI International DX contest from 12 Zulu May 7th to 11:59 Zulu May 8th. This is sponsored by the Association of Italian Radio Amateurs, 10 through 80 meters, no work bands, and the modes are CW, SSB, and RTTY.
We have the 7th call area QSO party, 1300 Zulu May 7th to 0700 Zulu May 8th, sponsored by the Central Oregon DX Club. The 7th call area in the U.S. covers the following states: Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and Arizona. So we're talking the western states in particular. The bands are 160 through 10 meters, and it's CW, SSB, and RTTY.
We have the Indiana QSO party, 15 Zulu May 7th to 03 Zulu May 8th, sponsored by the Hoosier DX and Contest Club. Bands 160 through 10 meters, and the modes SSB and CW.
The Delaware QSO party, 1700 Zulu May 7th to 2359 Zulu May 8th, is sponsored by the First State Amateur Radio Club, 160 through 10 meters, no work bands, also SSB, CW, and digital.
And finally, we have the New England QSO party, 20 Zulu May 7th to 2359 Zulu May 8th, sponsored by the New England Amateur Radio Clubs, bands 80 through 10 meters, and the modes SSB and CW.
Lots of activity on the ham bands coming up next weekend. If you're into contesting as a ham operator, or just want to listen to some hams in some of these contests as a shortwave listener, you'll have lots to choose from. So we'll post all of this information with links for each of them up on our Facebook page.
And we are out of time.
We are. We thank you for tuning in. If you do have any stories you think might be of interest to our listeners and to us, please consider passing them along either by email, radioreport@yahoo.com, or put them on our Facebook group, which is International Radio Report. It's always great to hear from our listeners, any comments or questions you have as well. So have a great week as we head into the month of May. We'll talk to you again next Sunday with our next edition of the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
Bye-bye.